My name is Elena Carter, and I thought meeting someone from Tinder would be harmless fun. His name was Daniel Hayes, and his profile seemed perfect, kind smile, easy words, everything I thought I wanted. But the night we met, I realized too late that Daniel wasn't who he claimed to be. And now, I don't know if he was ever human at all. I never thought a simple swipe on Tinder could lead to a night like this. His profile had seemed harmless enough: kind eyes, a polite smile, someone who liked quiet coffee shops and old movies. We had chatted for a few weeks, and everything felt easy, comfortable, like I already knew him. When he suggested meeting at a small cafe at the edge of town, I agreed without thinking twice. I told myself it was safe, just a short meetup in the early evening. But as soon as I pulled up to the cafe, a strange unease crept over me, curling its icy fingers around my chest. The cafe was almost empty. Dim lights flickered above the worn wooden tables, and the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and something else, something metallic and sharp that made my stomach churn. Outside, a cold wind whipped leaves across the pavement, rattling the glass doors. I stepped inside, my boots echoing against the cracked tiles. I scanned the room and immediately saw him sitting in the far corner, a tall figure hunched slightly over a table. The chair creaked as he adjusted his posture, and I could swear his eyes flicked to me the moment I entered. There was something off about him. At first I tried to convince myself it was just nerves. He smiled as I approached, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. They were too still, too calculating, like he was measuring me in ways that went beyond simple observation. I forced a smile, telling myself I was imagining it. He didn't speak much, just nodded when I sat down. The silence stretched awkwardly, broken only by the occasional clink of a spoon against a mug. I glanced around, hoping to distract myself, and that's when I noticed a small notebook lying on the table next to him. Its pages were worn, edges frayed, and it was filled with tiny, neat handwriting. Names, dates, and words I couldn't fully make out from across the table. I leaned slightly, trying to see it better, and my heart almost stopped when I saw a name that made my blood run cold. Mine. I laughed nervously, pretending it was a joke, and told myself it must be a coincidence. My pulse thudded in my ears, loud and insistent. I tried to focus on something else: his eyes, the cafe. Anything but the notebook seemed to burn itself into my vision. There were more names, scribbled and crossed out in black ink. Some had small marks next to them, circles and check marks I couldn't understand. And then there was mine, underlined, written in a way that made it impossible to ignore. I wanted to leave, but my legs felt frozen, rooted to the floor. Every instinct screamed at me to get up, to run, but I stayed. I kept telling myself I had to act normal, that panic would only make him notice. But there was no way to ignore the small details that started to pile up: the way he shifted his weight slightly every time I moved, the way his gaze followed me, even when I looked away, the faint scratch marks on his fingers that didn't match his clean appearance. The room seemed to grow colder, darker, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. The flickering light overhead cast long warped shadows across the floor, making it look like shapes were moving when I blinked. I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just first date nerves, I thought. Maybe I was imagining everything, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. I excused myself to use the restroom, hoping a short break would calm my racing heart. As I stood and walked past him, I caught a glimpse of his face. His smile hadn't changed, but it had twisted, just slightly, enough to make my stomach churn. I looked over my shoulder at the notebook again, and I swear I saw a new line written on the page: my name, followed by something else. I couldn't read it in time, and when I blinked it was gone. The restroom was small, the fluorescent light harsh, making every shadow more pronounced. I washed my hands, trying to tell myself I was imagining it all. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw a faint reflection behind me, almost like a shadow lingering closer than it should have been. I spun around. Nothing, just the empty tiled room. My breath came in short, rapid bursts, and I tried to calm myself. I left the restroom quickly, feeling exposed and raw. He was still sitting there, watching me, not looking at me directly, but somehow, I could feel his gaze crawling over every inch of me. I told myself I could handle it, I could play it cool. But then, as I walked back to my seat, I noticed something on the floor near his chair: small, deliberate scratches, forming letters I couldn't quite make out. The last thing I saw before I sat down was his eyes locking with mine, unblinking, and a slow, deliberate smile that felt too wide. Something about him wasn't human, and deep down I already knew I wasn't just meeting him for coffee. He had been waiting for me. After leaving the restroom, I tried to act normal, but my chest felt tight, and every step I took seemed to echo unnaturally in the quiet cafe. He was still sitting there, his posture perfectly still, watching me as if I were a fragile creature under a microscope. I told myself to breathe, to focus on something other than the way my pulse hammered in my ears, but it was impossible. I finished my coffee quickly, not even tasting it, and tried to make an excuse to leave. As I stood up, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and froze. It was a message from him. "I can see you. Don't walk alone." I dropped the phone. My fingers trembled as I picked it up again, convinced it must be a cruel joke or some sort of coincidence. but the tone felt sharp, deliberate, impossible to ignore. My stomach turned, and suddenly the cafe didn't feel safe at all. I wanted to run, to disappear into the streets, but my legs felt heavy, like they were rooted to the floor. I told myself I had to leave, so I pushed past him, avoiding his gaze as I stepped outside. The wind hit me like ice, and the streets were unnervingly quiet. The dim street lamps flickered, casting long shadows across the pavement. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting him to step out behind me. My heart raced faster with every step. It didn't take long before I noticed movement at the edges of my vision. At first, I thought it was a trick of the streetlights, but the shadows resolved into a figure walking parallel to me. He was keeping his distance, never too close, yet somehow always just far enough to be seen. My stomach churned. He hadn't come outside with me, had he? I'd thought I'd left him behind, but it was him. I picked up my pace. He mirrored me. Every street I turned down, every alley I ducked into, he appeared just beyond reach, gliding silently. My chest ached with panic, and I tried to call a friend. My fingers shook as I dialed, but the call dropped instantly. I tried again. Dead, I sprinted down a narrow alley, hoping to lose him, but the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally. The walls pressed in closer than they should, and the faint echo of footsteps that weren't mine followed me relentlessly. When I risked a glance over my shoulder, I saw more figures emerging from the darkness, silent, shadowy forms that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Their faces were pale and blurred, their eyes wide and fixed on me. They didn't move like people, but like shapes guided by his will. Panic hit me like a physical blow. I twisted through another alley, desperate for safety, but then the impossible happened. Ahead of me, the path split into several narrow streets, but every route led me back to the same cafe. The glowing windows stared at me like a cruel joke. It wasn't possible. I had walked 4 block hours, maybe, and still ended up in the same place. I ran to the cafe entrance, my hand shaking as I tried to open the door, only to find it locked, and then I felt it, a presence behind me. I froze, breath catching in my throat. Slowly, almost ceremoniously, he stepped out from the shadows. He wasn't running, wasn't chasing, yet I could feel the tension like a physical force pressing against my chest. His smile was the same slow, deliberate curve, but now it seemed hungrier, more patient, as if he had been waiting for this moment my entire life. I turned to run in the other direction, but there was no escape. Every street, every alley, every doorway led me back here. The cafe didn't belong in this reality, yet it was tethered to me, like it existed just for me to walk in circles. The air thickened with an unbearable cold, and the shadows around him stretched unnaturally, curling like fingers toward me. Then I noticed it etched into the cracked pavement by the entrance. Faint scratches forming letters that weren't there before. My stomach churned as I read them. "You can't leave. I'm waiting." A shiver ran down my spine, and I realized the truth. He wasn't following me. He was controlling the streets, the alleys, the very space around me. And the shadowy figures, they weren't strangers. They were his helpers, his witnesses, silent and obedient, waiting for my next move. I wanted to scream, to beg, to run, but it was useless. I was trapped, and somehow, I knew this was just the beginning. I don't remember how long I ran or if I was even running at all. Time didn't make sense anymore. Every street I turned down, every alley I darted through, seemed to stretch endlessly before me, twisting like a nightmare maze designed just to keep me trapped. My lungs burned, my legs ached, and my mind started to fray under the weight of the impossible. And through it all, I could feel him. Always him, just at the edge of my vision, gliding silently, watching. I thought I might have found a way out when I spotted a familiar street sign, a real one, not warped or twisted like the others, and I ran toward it with every ounce of strength I had left. But as I reached the end of the block, my blood ran cold. There it was again, the cafe. Its windows glowed faintly in the darkness, a beacon I had already tried to escape countless times. The door was open now, as if inviting me in, daring me to step closer. I didn't want to, but my legs carried me forward anyway. Some strange, unexplainable force seemed to pull me toward it. My hands shook as I pushed the door open. The interior was empty, eerily quiet, and the flickering lights cast shadows that moved just out of sync with reality. He was there, sitting in the same corner as before, but something had changed. The notebook was gone, replaced by a small, leather-bound book that seemed impossibly old. The pages were yellowed and fragile, filled with names, dates, and strange symbols that made my eyes sting to read. I wanted to leave, to run, but the cafe didn't seem to have any exits anymore. The walls stretched higher than they should, the windows framed streets that didn't exist. I tried the front door again, it wouldn't budge. I tried the back door, locked. Every path forward or back led to the same impossible room, and I felt my stomach twist with panic. I noticed a faint sound then, almost too soft to hear. Whispers. They were low, layered voices that seemed to come from every corner at once. They weren't speaking words I could understand, but I felt their intent. They were calling me, beckoning, and yet warning me. I wanted to cover my ears, but it was too late. The sound had wormed its way into my skull, pressing against my thoughts, fraying the edges of my sanity. The old book caught my attention again. I walked closer, compelled, and the pages opened to a section filled with dates and names of people who had gone missing over the years. And then I saw it, my name, written in careful script, underlined multiple times, followed by a date. Today's date. My heart stopped. I couldn't move. A shadow shifted behind him. I turned slowly and my stomach dropped. The room had expanded impossibly, revealing a long corridor that stretched into darkness. Figures stood along its edges, pale and silent, faces blurred like smudges in water. They didn't blink, they didn't breathe. And yet I knew they were aware of me, waiting, observing, silently judging. I realized with a sickening clarity that I wasn't just being watched. I was part of this place now. Every step I took, every breath I drew, had been accounted for, tracked, and documented. The cafe, the streets, the alleys, they weren't real. They were part of a labyrinth, constructed to keep me under his control, to make me realize how powerless I truly was. The whispers grew louder, turning into words I could just barely make out. Your turn, your story. Tonight my chest tightened. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My voice was swallowed by the air itself, leaving only my ragged breaths and the echo of my own fear. Then I saw him move. Slowly, deliberately, he stood from his chair, stepping toward me with a confidence that made my stomach twist. The shadows around him stretched like living things, curling toward me, wrapping around my feet, climbing my legs. I tried to step back, but the floor seemed to shift beneath me, tilting, forcing me closer. And then I noticed the floor itself. Etched into the worn tiles were letters I hadn't seen before, carved deep and dark. You can't leave. Not now. Not ever. My eyes darted to him, but he was no longer just a man in a chair. He was larger somehow, his presence overwhelming, filling the room, filling my mind. The whispers escalated, the shadows writhed, and I realized horrifyingly that I had never had a chance. I'd been caught the moment I agreed to meet him, and every step I had taken since was just part of his design. A cold wind brushed my neck, and I felt a hand impossible, unseen brush against my shoulder. I spun around, nothing, just shadows. And in the corner of the room I thought I saw my reflection in the dark glass of a window, but it wasn't me, it was him, smiling wider than ever, and in his eyes, I saw every one of my fears reflected back, like I had already been swallowed whole. I don't know how long I wandered after that night. Hours, days. Time had lost all meaning, stretching and snapping like fragile glass. Every street, every alley, every doorway I tried to escape through only twisted back to the cafe, its flickering lights calling me like a predator's lure. He was always there, at the edge of my vision, silent and patient, never running, never chasing, yet I could feel him pressing against the walls of my mind. I was trapped, and every instinct screamed that there was no way out. Desperation drove me to the first apartment I could find, a small, dimly lit space that looked ordinary at first, but the second I stepped inside, I froze. It was identical to my own apartment. Every object, every picture, every tiny detail mirrored my life perfectly. My keys lay on the counter where I always left them. My favorite mug sat in the exact corner on the shelf, and even a sweater I thought I had lost was draped over the chair. It was arranged with such care that it felt like a shrine to me, a record of my life, captured and displayed. I moved through the apartment cautiously, my heart hammering. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow seemed alive. My phone lay on the table, unlocked, with dozens of messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Each one contained fragments of my lifetimes I had been alone. Moments I thought were private. I realized, with a creeping horror, that this place wasn't just a copy of my apartment. It was a trap, designed to teach me that nothing I considered safe was mine anymore. I tried to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the walls. The lock clicked in a way that sounded deliberate, almost mocking. I banged on it, screamed, tried to force it open, but nothing worked. The apartment seemed alive, breathing, shifting subtly around me. The air was cold, carrying a metallic temps that made my stomach turn. Then I saw it. In the corner of the room, a mirror I didn't remember having reflected more than my own terrified expression. Behind me, though, someone or something loomed. I whipped around. The space was empty. My pulse raced. I turned back to the mirror. There he was, his face pressed close to mine, smiling, unblinking, and when I blinked again, he was gone. The reflection remained, though grinning in a way that felt too wide, too human to be anything other than horrifying. I realized then that this wasn't just a man following me. He had rewritten my world to trap me completely. He had taken my memories, my spaces, my routines, and turned them into a prison. Every step I had taken since our meeting had been guided. Every street I ran down had been part of a larger design. The shadowy figures I had seen before weren't strangers, they were as witnesses, silently observing me, waiting for me to break. I stumbled toward the kitchen, desperate for something, anything, that might feel familiar. On the counter lay a small notebook, open to a page with my name written neatly at the top. The letters beneath it twisted into shapes I couldn't read, but they felt like a message meant to torment me. My fingers hovered over the page, trembling, and as I touched it, a sudden, icy coldness shot through my hand, as if the book itself were alive. I backed away, and the apartment seemed to shift again. Walls elongated, Doors stretched into impossible angles, and the ceiling rose higher than it should have. The whispers returned, low and layered, coming from every corner at once. They weren't speaking words I could understand, but I could feel their intent, patience, observation, ownership. Every sound pressed against my skull, and I realized with terror that I wasn't alone. He had never left. He had been inside me, inside the apartment, inside my life, all along. A sudden movement caught my eye. On the floor, faint scratches had appeared, dark and deliberate, forming words I couldn't ignore. "You belong here now." My chest tightened. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My reflection in the mirror shifted again, and this time, I saw not one, but multiple versions of me trapped in the glass, all staring back with wide, terrified eyes. They were smiling faintly, but not with joy, more like a warning, a preview of what would happen if I failed to escape. I backed toward the door, only to see him materialize in the corner of the room, taller, darker, and more menacing than ever. His presence filled the space, stretching into every shadow, every reflection. The whispers rose into a chorus, urging me forward, pulling me deeper into madness. And then I realized the worst part. He wasn't just here to watch. He wanted me to understand that I could never leave, that my life, my memories, my very existence, were now part of his design. And in that moment, I understood. The cafe, the streets, the apartment, they were all his. And I was already inside. I don't know who I am anymore. I wake up in places I don't recognize, though sometimes they look like versions of my apartment, warped and distorted, as if a memory had been stretched until it cracked. Other times I find myself back at the cafe, sitting at the table across from him, the coffee cold, the lights flickering, his smile unchanging. It's like time resets, looping endlessly, forcing me to relive the same terror over and over. I scream, I fight, I try to run, but no one hears me, and no matter where I go, he is there. At first I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe this was a nightmare, a hallucination, something my brain had created out of fear. But then I checked my phone. My gallery is full of pictures I don't remember taking. In every single one, no matter the date or place, he is there in the background, standing, smiling, sometimes only half visible, as if he wanted me to notice him but not fully acknowledge his presence. Some photos are old years old, from before I even had Tinder. That's when the truth began to sink in. He had always been there, long before I swiped right, long before I even knew his name. I deleted the app thinking maybe that would cut the connection. But when I opened my phone again, the app was still there, the same red flame icon staring at me like an unblinking eye. Inside, every profile was his. The same face, the same smile, but with different names and details. No matter how many times I tried to uninstall it, it reappeared. No matter how many times I reset my phone, the pictures remained. I moved cities, thinking maybe distance would help. New apartment, new number, new life. But the first night, when I looked out the window, I saw him standing on the sidewalk staring up at me, not moving, not waving, just waiting. The next morning, the hallway of my building smelled faintly metallic, the same sharp scent from the cafe. On my door, scratched deep into the wood, were the words, "I found you." I tried to ignore him, but the more I tried, the more he invaded every part of my life. The shadows in my room at night stretched longer than they should, curling toward me like fingers. The mirrors no longer reflect me alone, they reflect him too, standing just behind my shoulder, smiling like he already owns me. When I sleep, I dream of corridors filled with faceless figures, all whispering in unison, all turning their heads toward me when I try to run. Their voices sound like mine, overlapping and distorted. I stopped answering my phone because every call is his voice, every text is from him. Sometimes, they're written in words I don't understand. Other times, they're disturbingly intimate, recounting things I never told anyone, childhood fears, secrets I buried deep, moments I thought no one saw. He knows them all. He writes them into the notebook that always seems to appear wherever I go, as if my life is nothing more than another entry in his collection. I've tried to fight it. I've smashed mirrors, destroyed my phone, burned the notebook, but it doesn't matter. Everything comes back. The notebook is always there, waiting, filled with more details than before, as if mocking my attempts to erase him. My reflection always shows him lingering, closer each time. The pictures keep multiplying, even though I don't remember taking them. And now, the worst part, I'm starting to see changes in myself. When I look into the mirror, my smile doesn't look like mine anymore. It stretches just a little too wide. My eyes seem a little too still, too calculating. Sometimes, for just a second, I see his face where mine should be. It fades quickly, but the more it happens, the less I can convince myself it's just my imagination. I think he's replacing me, or maybe he already has. Maybe I was never really myself to begin with. Just another version of him, recycled and replayed in a loop I can't escape. Tonight, I looked through my phone again, scrolling back through photos. At the very beginning, years before Tinder even existed, there was a picture of me as a child, standing in front of my parents' old house, smiling. And there, in the background, leaning against the fence, was the same man, same smile, same eyes, unchanged by time. I don't know if I was ever free. I don't know if anyone ever is. All I know is that when I looked out the window just now, I didn't see him across the street like usual. I saw myself, standing there in the dark, smiling up at me, and this time, the reflection didn't move when I did.